The Scarlet Women. Welcome to the ATELIER MELUSINE, Southwest France. I would like to say what an honour it is to be part of such a brilliant panel. Thank you to Judith Noble, our chair, and to Jessie, Aaron, Natalia, Michael and the wonderful ESSWE teams. I'm very sad not to be with you physically in Malmö today. ATELIER MELUSINE is a gallery and working studio in rural Southwest France. We are a not-for-profit organisation and work at the intersection of contemporary art in multimedia formats. The thematic focus is on the environment and the feminine. This presentation demonstrates a practice-led collaborative working and research project, Scarlet Women, which has allowed participants to access greater and more liberal approaches to knowledge bases, gain fresh perspectives, new information and create major artistic outcomes. Created by Dr. Manon Hedenborg White and myself, it is an interdisciplinary exploration of the archetypal and religio-historical concept of the Scarlet Woman, or Babylon, and is approached from our specific fields of contemporary art practice and the history of religion, and expanded by the use of broad collaborative techniques and varied research methods, creating an international arts project based at the ATELIER MELUSINE, France. ATELIER MELUSINE has a particular interest in collaborative multidisciplinary projects. It uses a post-disciplinary approach and a commixture of traditional and new digitally led technologies. We have previously collaborated with the Coptic Magical Papyri project for a multimedia exhibition called Temporal Traces, which showed not only the wonderful manuscripts and their illustrations, but created a digital animation of the works with singer Luis Carralero. The digital exhibition to accompany the Scarlet Woman is Brown University's Atalanta Fugians, and demonstrates the advantages and possibilities of digital, creative and academic research in a revisionist manner. Our process-led approach allows a freedom which is explored outside of the formal academic setting, challenges methodologies, allowing for surprise and flexible outcomes as well as the acquisition of new information. Our global educational institutes, with the exception of the arts and sciences, including social sciences, notably environmental studies and anthropology, with its emic approaches, often difficult to complete practice-led courses at level 5 or above. No one questions the artist's studio or scientist's lab. They are places of practical experimentations, also places of potential wildness, folly, risk-taking and self-expression. But many other areas of study remain limited to traditional text-based outcomes. Digital technology is altering this. Arts practice often is research. We individually bring different concepts of what the Scarlet Woman might be. These differences of approach and experience were embraced, and guest artists, academics and esoteric practitioners from over 14 countries participated, a high proportion of whom were or are also teachers. It was necessary to try to establish what this icon was, before exploring further or trying to evaluate or restate its meaning in contemporary arts and historic genres, to see how and where it might depart from traditional ideas, and what new media could do this best. The initial question, what is a Scarlet Woman, and call for artists included a detailed questionnaire. Outcomes and responses focused on religious, historical, literary and imaginal expressions of this icon, culminating in site-specific artworks, text, interactive digital artworks, photography, film, sculpture, painting, printmaking, exhibitions and conferences. We first needed to acknowledge our cultural and linguistic biases, that the Scarlet Woman is an Abrahamic device, featuring most strongly in Christian religious doctrines, but also that she has parallels in many non-European and non-Christian schemata. There are the Divas, the Kalis, and the Serpent and Dragon Women, and many more. The last centuries paint her as a pariah, a figure of destruction, deception, and manipulative or cursed sexual and regenerative powers. Our questionnaire aimed to pin down qualities, to frame a being, or perhaps bring one into being. Her age, race, dress, lifestyle, sexual behaviours, and the results suggest that the Scarlet Woman is anyone and everyone. She inhabits all of our psyches as a reflection or rejection of the feminine aspects of ourselves, shaped by our moral and social codes and constructs. She was conjured in many forms, some of the most interesting responses dialectic. For me, the most fascinating were the verbal responses of young men, from whose wondrous archetypal forms of ageless feminine power emanated. She is above all a powerful and immediately present, internalized, active entity. Participants were allowed to remain anonymous, but many who submitted their artworks were happy to be open about all aspects of their life and sexuality, most often reflecting on how this has changed and altered with maturity. Not all completed the questionnaires, but all contributed directly through lectures and digital roundtable events. Very few made new works for the project, rather showing works from sometimes decade-old series, and the content was very body-centric. The wonderful Penny Slinger showed her photographic series, which became a miniature tarot or divination set, a sound installation about menstruation, and a site-specific piece at Chateau Moreuil. Slinger's feminist approach is deeply influenced by spiritual and religious knowledge, and she is fearless in her practice. But this boldness was echoed throughout the show. Trender's wearable digital costumes were included alongside Oxiomorid's torpid sculptures and Sarah Sparks' delicate gouaches showing mediumistic seances. The overriding response was in film. These films dealt with the violence, abuse and consequences of sexual repression and its personal and collective impact on society, particularly on women. The work dealt with physical and psychosexual violence aimed at the feminine, be that from a religious or political perspective, but still positioning woman as victim. It contained a high level of mild pornographic content, or at least overtly sexual content, with tattooed and red-stained bodies and references to both Crowley's and St. John of Patmos's ideas of the Scarlet. Stephen Pope's retranslations of the Talmud from the pre-Masoretic Hebrew particularly impacted the participants' understanding of the linguistic history of the Scarlet Woman, demonstrating the comprehensive demonization of the divine feminine alongside contemporary debates around gender identity. Part 1, 2020-22, initiated new partnerships, research, collaborative and funding opportunities, producing new artistic works and ideas. Initial responses have tended towards a positive representation of the independent, sexual, magical, powerful, fecund, menstrual feminine, who paradoxically remains a victim or poisoned scapegoat. The Scarlet Woman remains the imagined yet violent victim of a patriarchal system, most of her associated negatives subtly deemed reflexive. For parts 2 and 3, 2023-24, the question remains, what in the 21st century is truly transgressive in or of the feminine in a post-gender, transhuman, Anthropocene, technocratic world? My esteemed colleagues on the panel will address in more detailed aspects of relational, participatory and alchemical parallels and processes within arts practice. The Scarlet Woman exhibition presented a mix of novel and traditional methods, but allowed us to contemplate the aesthetic of esoteric artwork. Additionally, the esoteric aspects of esoteric art. Is anything truly hidden? What remains esoteric? In a postmodern world with a plethora of visual and imaginative cultural opportunities, from the natural ecological to the deep fake and everything in between, in Europe and other secular parts of the world, magic is now popularist. It is not hidden or obscured. It is readily consumed. Especially in the worlds of literature and film, magic is mainstream. From C.S. Lewis and Tolkien to Star Wars and Harry Potter, we've been fed a diet of visual magic for almost a century. It seems secular societies allow more room for the esoteric to become exoteric and multifaceted, and for women to have more public space and power. The aesthetics of esoteric art have broadened and been re-looked at. Artists like Hilma Klint have been recently given huge exposure. The horror film genre leads the way, and as a gallery we have shown films like The Deeper You Dig by Wonder Wheel Productions, and their more recent Hellbender, with the scriptwriters and production team visiting the gallery. Hellbender cannot be recommended enough. These build on the films of Anger, Warhol, Hitchcock, The House of Hammer Horror, and not least Spielberg, with the sister genre of sci-fi, techno-magic. All are riven through and structured around religious and esoteric themes and archetypes, which often correspond with the well-used hero's journey trope. In literature most recently, Donna Haraway, Margaret Atwood and Marina Warner have tackled the traditional feminine root of the fairy tale, updating it sometimes brutally and hopefully not prophetically. The reinvention of the old religion into the new is continual. The aesthetics of post-war, postmodernist, minimalist art were defined and led by Jewish American artists, taking over from the Christian hold of centuries before and creating a new primordial and neurological language around the simplicity of sophistication, looking almost for a new vision after the Holocaust. But film did not match this minimalistic approach. Esoteric film styles have more in common with high Catholic symbolism and psychedelics than simplicity. And of course, there is a direct feed from literature into film, which with the advent of internet fan fiction is either diluted and branches off in tree schemata, or which circles back on itself. Additionally, magical film does not attempt to sever stylistic references, rather has developed a very recognizable stylistic set of semiotics in many ways. In contrast, esoteric and spiritual artworks have had a relatively uncomfortable or at least a narrow positioning within the art sector, and again are often connected with women's art. The sexual content of magical art has also continued to be socially permitted, both for exploitation and liberation depending on your cultural belief system. And the consumption of pornography has spread like Japanese knotweed across the internet. The modern Scarlet Woman might be a leading light on OnlyFans. At all times we are governed by the stereotypes and fashions of our era, and the aesthetics of overtly magical or spiritual works have been less valued and more marginalised in Western art, and less disguised as minimalism, often because they overtly deal with the feminine or concept of the divine feminine. There is much disguised and repositioned as new, and much magical art practice can be perceived in the relationships between artists and scientists. Traditionally, we would have called this alchemy, and it would have been both funded and forbidden by the Church. Today, it is funded by the Ministries of Defence and Big Pharma. The notion of magical reproduction and childbirth, the creation of life or elixirs of immortality, still takes centre stage. In Chardonnay and Ripley's Unborn ESSWE9, which focus on the creation of a child outside of the womb, a magical child, with possible echoes of the magical child Crowley wished to elicit through his Scarlet Woman, is centre stage. Yet women create life naturally. It has ever been the envy of the male, and we do not live in unconnected silos. Esoteric art is often seen as separate from this scientific and alchemical modernism, possibly not due to content, but due to the media it uses. The many images of hypersexualized Dungeon and Dragons type females, or the limpid gouaches of fat women in mandala or psychedelic stylized backdrops, do not match the current aesthetics desired of high-end contemporary art worlds. Curation of the exhibition was critical. Part 1 was the research phase, so we were collaborating data and ideas and then reflecting on those. I didn't impose an aesthetic or professional criteria, as I normally would. Rather, entries were open and unselected. Some images provided were from those who would describe themselves as complete non-artists. These participants were interested in the themes from scholarly perspectives. Others were from very established artists like Penny Slinger. I wanted a cohesive show demonstrating information, but had to be aware of my own aesthetic and feminist bias. The Atelier MELUSINE is a publicly funded contemporary art space and shows work which is selected largely around my personal interests, the intersection of art, science and religion, but also in a manner which reflects the aesthetic choices around the work we show. Many of our shows have a supernatural or immaterial foundation, like Ruth Legier's Women and Water, or the Devotional Acts exhibition which investigated art as devotional practice, but the work has a definite contemporary academic artistic style and taste, and so this also came into play at this stage of the process. The decision was taken to print reproductions of many of the 2D artworks to a particular scale rather than to transport the originals. This allowed an approach to subject which then focused on the content and theme rather than the materiality or medium. Whilst we displayed some original works, the majority of 2D pieces were printed to A2 on paper or A4 on aluminium. This allowed for the works to be read thematically. It became a very tight show focused on image, moving image, sound and text. The entire gallery was painted scarlet and very full of image and noise. Film and photography were the overwhelming medium worked in, and we created an intense immersion into the possibilities of what the Scarlet Woman was and is, but also a laboratory with online pages creating a broader virtual exhibit. On cultural difference, we had submissions from around the world and were considerate of the political, public position, participation placed on our artists. We were aware that we might need to be sensible of this as we showcased female nationals from very conservative religious nations. However, the censorship we finally encountered was with some of our American artists who had great anxieties about airing the panel sessions we filmed. They felt that screening them would endanger not only their careers but their families, due to the highly Christian conservative locales they lived in. This was shocking as we discussed subjects very normal to our own Eurocentric environ. It seemed regressive and restrictive, and meant that the recording sadly could not be shown, but again demonstrated shifts in global trends, social permissions, fashions, and our own expectations. We had submissions from both men and women, with the overwhelming number of pieces coming from women who were already working around the theme. Applications were welcomed from all gender identities. Reflections. The Scarlet Woman is an icon which many people carry internally, even if in an unformulated way. She is experientially, culturally, and personally bound, and contains great hope and great anger. Pope's retranslations of the Talmudic and biblical text totally reframed the negative hypersexualized destructresses, the Eves, the Liliths, and the Magdalenes, in an utterly different and far more balanced way, the overlays of sin being just that, overlays. His work has become seminal to my personal and professional understanding of the positioning of women, and offers ways forward in challenging long-established narratives which uphold our current power structures. The role of storytelling and imagination remains crucial. The realms of Yetzirah, the traditional magical stronghold, lies here, having moved from painted image and manuscript to screen and multimedia in all its forms. The ability to define and control the feminine is still central to humanity. We need to find and generate new stories, or actually truly understand the old and match them with contemporary scientific understandings through multidisciplinary collaboration. There are such a variety of genre of artworks which use the supernatural, immaterial, religious themes and images. It is the themes, not the style or medium, which unifies the work. Manga, surrealism, digital animation, oil painting, textiles and words. Their messages in our postmodern world only cohesive through subject and intention, often with great ambiguity. Even this is ironic and prescriptive. They are reliant on sophisticated visual and oral comprehension. Additionally, the traditional esoteric genres are often now mainstream, such as horror films, jewellery, or TikTok, and thus not truly esoteric. Much of the work and responses did not highlight the transgressive in the female, recasting woman as perpetrator rather than victim. We felt a need to step away from the furious wronged to look at the flip side of the taboos. The archetypes of the bad mother, the poisoner, the madame, the abuser, the deceiver, all were absent from these body of works. There is evidently a huge range of abuses of the feminine, but what was not excavated was the abuses and negatives by the feminine, even if they can be alleged to have risen in response to a destructive patriarchy. The question remained, what is transgressive in the female? In the early 21st century, it still revolves around sexuality and sex, with gender politics and the internet at the foreground, the paradoxical powerlessness of the wrong goddess, the want of and corruption caused by power. Phases 2 and 3 of the Scarlet Woman included International Women's Day events, the exhibition de MELUSINE at Bandouche Contemporary Art Space in Chauvigny, deeper engagement with the work of Stephen Pope, and the digital trail, the Scarlet Trail, or Sentier Écarlate. Both Manon and I are working on new artistic artefacts from the work which will emerge in Phase 3 and 4 in the form of more text, interviews, films and painting. The Scarlet Trail has 2 further linked projects, Trees of Life and the Chemin de Fer, one which photographs 11 women in their environments, the second a series of musical interventions on the abandoned railway tracks and deserted stations of the region, with violinist Lucy Perkins and Una Keogh, profiling wasting, dormant infrastructure, a metaphor in its own right. The sexy, magical, feminist project is suddenly being valued for its potential social cohesion and community building through arts practice. The collaborators have worked particularly well at a distance and have a deep respect for each other's skill sets and differing belief systems. It is also dependent on the support of artists, collaborators and contributors who've given up their time to work on the Scarlet Woman project. Without their input there would be no project, and it has highlighted the enormous vein of interest across many disciplines. So the thinking is lateral and flexible, the support in kind enormous, and the Scarlet Woman alive and kicking.